an original.
From Story Studio Network.
The 2030 Project is a Story Studio Network podcast sponsored by Daily Bread Food Bank, a Toronto-based charity whose mission is to collaborate with all to eliminate food insecurity and advocate for solutions to end poverty. What would it take to eliminate poverty in Canada by the year 2030? This is the 2030 Project. It's a podcast that explores why poverty persists and what we can do about it in this country. We endeavor to uncover what's been successful with Canada's poverty reduction strategy, but then what needs to come next. The 2030 Project tackles some of the biggest and the most pressing social issues facing this country today. I'm Dave Trafford, and thanks for joining us. Well, here we are. It is the 10th and final episode of this second season of the 2030 Project. And over the last 9 episodes, we've talked about everything from the level of patience of those who are on the front lines in terms of reducing poverty, the real reckoning that we are facing in terms of how are we going to pay for this, and the need to get serious about affordable housing. But as we speak, our friends at the Daily Bread Food Bank are unveiling the Who's Hungry 2022. So in this episode, we go to the floor of the Daily Bread Food Bank and we explore who's hungry in 2022. All right, it's going to get a little noisy in here from time to time, and that's because we aren't in our typical confines of doing our podcast interviews in the quiet of the studio. We're back at the Daily Bread Food Bank here in Toronto, and of course, the team here at Daily Bread has been behind the enormous effort around the 2030 Project, and we're just wrapping up Season 2, and we're sitting right in the middle where they do all the sorting, so there's the jam and the juice and the mac and cheese and the milk and the miscellaneous and the pasta sauce. It goes on for rows and rows and rows. So Diane Dyson's with us, and she is the VP of Advocacy here and Research at Daily Bread. Neil Hetherington, you all will know by now, the CEO at Daily Bread. I just saw a whole bunch of people at the front door. Diane, are they coming in to sort and volunteer? What are they doing?
We've had them here all afternoon, crowds in each of the sorting areas.
Good. Okay, so they've been busy. And the one thing that we want to talk about, and I think we were back and forth on LinkedIn over the last couple of weeks, just talking about food security, and we were both, Neil, commenting on Laurie Nichols' comments around her appearance before a Commons Committee in Ottawa and so on, and all about food waste. And it's hard to imagine that all of this food is needed desperately. We're wasting food. We can't seem to kind of get our arms around this. And one of the MPs in Ottawa said, "It was a pleasure to meet you, Laurie. You know, it's great that you're such a champion, and we really must do better." And I'm thinking, okay, we're a little bit past the must do better line, aren't we?
We're absolutely past that. If you look at, just on the food waste side of things, so Laurie will articulate, and the Second Harvest will articulate, a loss of about $50 billion worth of food every year. But I think
just stop. $50 freaking billion.
That's how much food waste happens in Canada on an annual basis, according to Second Harvest. And so that is fundamentally wrong and against any of the values we espouse. But looking beyond that, I think we got to ask the question: is it food waste that that will solve the problem? We're actually tackling the systemic issue, which is that people are in poverty. People's incomes don't match the expenses that they have, and I think it's yes, of course, we could make sure that there's enough food in Canada for everybody, but it's around resource allocation, and so. As long as Second Harvest can get that food out, I think that's a great thing, but it's not an either-or situation.
No, clearly. And I think, though, Diane, when we look at that, part of the problem that's been accelerated here is the cost of food because of what we've seen happen, pandemic and supply chain and inflation. But when you start talking about we're wasting $50 billion worth of food, that's a cost that I hadn't taken into account when we started to look at the inflationary, issues around supply chain and so on. So I like to think I'm paying attention. This problem's a whole lot deeper than I think most of us know.
Yeah, although I don't know how much the cost or the waste of food might be affecting the cost of food. So I think that we have to continue to draw those lines, perhaps. But I'm going to go back to Neil's statement that it really is about the systemic issues, that food security is an income security problem, and we've heard that throughout the podcast. My colleague at North York Harvest, Sarah Harvest, puts it pithily when she says that it's not about the cost of the cucumber, but it's about the income you have to buy it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we've lost sight of that, although I guess more recently it's become more apparent because folks who are, and I use this word advisedly because it's so loaded, but are privileged, are walking into the grocery store now, Neil, and saying, holy cow, that roast cost me $80.
Well, on a positive note with that, it means people are talking about, they call it affordability. You know, the roast is costing $80. I don't know if my kids will ever be able to afford a home of their own. People are starting to have those conversations, and we've said it on this podcast all the time around the kitchen table. And my hope is that as those conversations happen, that it will begin to drive policy. I recently was speaking in Ottawa about food insecurity, and was talking about in the pandemic 2 years ago how we all said we need to build back better. And we kind of forgot about that. You know, I don't know, like we're just not seeing those policies that we all said, hey, this makes complete sense. We had CERB, but is there the momentum right now politically to have a guaranteed income? I'm not sure that that's in place. We did have a slight rise in terms of disability payments in Ontario, and that was a good thing. But I'm not sure that there is the political movement that we need in the country right now to solve whether or not somebody can afford that cucumber.
And that's showing up in our numbers. We're seeing in this year's report for the first time that the number of people who report that somebody in their household is employed is doubled.
Wow. So that we're talking about, you know, folks who have jobs and
coming
now
through our doors now.
coming through the door.
And to boot, the median income of a food bank client actually declined year over year. It declined by $540. And what does that translate into? It means that the average food bank user has $8.01 per day after paying for their rent and their utilities, paying for their accommodation. They have $8 a day to pay for, you know, clothes, to pay for medications, to pay for food. And so we're in a situation where there are more clients and there is more depth of depravity in terms of lack of income.
So let me understand the picture here. We got more people who are coming through the door who have jobs. Do we have a sense of what kind of work they're doing? Is it sort of the issues around the gig economy or part-time work?
We're seeing a lot of the gig economy. So we asked people about whether it was full-time and part-time. Lots of full-time workers, but they don't have benefits. They're working much more precariously. And the people that are caught in those jobs are the people that we know are traditionally marginalized anyways, most likely to be immigrants and racialized women. So working hand to mouth and not able to afford to keep themselves housed as well as fed.
A lot of the conversation we had during pandemic was we were seeing the frontline workers, particularly in the supply chain area, where they had to go to work. They didn't have the benefits you're talking about, Diane. Are we getting a sense that these people whom we need to move the food, to move the supply, it sounds to me like they might be on the front line and might not have otherwise been there as far as the food bank was concerned in the past?
They're a big population among those that are new coming through our doors. And then the other folks that we still continue to see are the people that have such low incomes because social assistance rates set you at half of what the poverty line is. The poverty line, which we've determined is what you need to survive a dignified life.
So just to illustrate it, that's around $2,200 per month, and disability is $1,200. So we legislate that if you are disabled, you must be in poverty. Another thing that came out of the report that was just glaring to me, many years ago, we used to talk about the percentage of income that people are spending on housing. And we started getting really nervous that it was creeping above what is acceptable, which is generally seen as about 30%. So it was starting to creep up to 40% and 50%, and people who were advocating for affordable housing were really screaming and saying this is fundamentally wrong. Here's something that's absolutely nuts. 18% of the people who are going to food banks spend 100% of their income on housing. I mean, it's 1 in 5. And given the number, we're not talking about a small sample size. We at the Daily Bread, we operate in Toronto along with North York Harvest, and we're seeing, we used to see about 60,000 client visits per month. That number is 186,000 client visits per month. It's tripled. So we're talking about this hitting hard and hitting deeply to so many people in the city.
You're telling me that they've spent all of their money just to house themselves.
And therefore they have to rely on food charity, they have to rely on friends and family, perhaps debt if they're able to get debt, which is not likely, but they have to rely on friends, family, and charity. And when we believe in, this whole series has been about values. When we believe that fundamentally everybody has a right to food, that right is being violated, and we just need to advocate louder and let people know.
Yeah, well, how much louder can we be? I mean, I don't mean to be glib, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's on a positive note.
Look at you being all optimistic.
I'm trying very hard. There are more of the conversations. I got to say, this is an area where credit's not often given to media, and the media is putting a light and shining a light on this more and more. Food banks have been in the news on a consistent basis, not because we want to be there, but because the lineups are going around the corner. And so I am optimistic that politicians will watch the news.
And we're having those kitchen table conversations we talked about in our first episode. More and more people are realizing how hard it is to get by. If you have a young person in your life and they're trying to rent an apartment, you can see what rents cost these days. If you're a new immigrant, you're also facing that. So those gaps are becoming so bald that we can't ignore them.
Well, I suggested on our daily podcast a couple days ago that if you really want to do something about it, you start to fill up the inboxes of the MPPs who are sitting on those committees and the MPs who are sitting on those committees that can make a decision and affect change, and not just say we need to do better, we need to be better. Let's see some action there. Let's just draw on that. Are there champions that you see in the policy and the politics side of things that are really pushing this rock up the hill?
We're hopeful right now about the Canada Disability Tax benefit that is being debated this week up on Parliament Hill, and they're hoping to get it through before the session ends. That will make a substantive change in the incomes of people with disabilities who won't have to rely simply on the provincial supports that are there.
So will that supplement it, or will it actually become sort of a level playing field across the country? Is that the idea?
Those details are still to be revealed when the regulations come in, right. So we're all holding our breath, but we're hearing such positive unanimity around it, realizing that in the same way that the child tax benefit or the seniors the GIS payments have made a difference and lifted groups out of poverty, this should do the same as well.
You see some of those champions today at Queen's Park. There was a march, the Ontario Disability Coalition. I think I've got the name wrong, but I do know that they were at Queen's Park again today to demand changes. Listening to clients talk about how they are able to survive. There are a lot of challenging stories out there. How many are going with a single meal a day? How many are skipping meals on a daily basis? The stats and the stories are grim.
So give me a comparative from Who's Hungry 2021 to 2022. I mean, it sounds, just based on what you guys are saying, the change has been significant from really bad to holy cow. Yeah,
so it's worse. Again, that stat I just gave earlier, pre-pandemic, 60,000. Now we're at 186,000. So the number, but the depth of $8 a day to survive on. So it is challenging. But here's another hopeful moment. The report isn't all about the bad news. It's filled with it, but there's more good news and policy recommendations in that report this year. And I'd encourage everybody who's listening to read a copy of the Who's Hungry report, have a conversation around your kitchen table with your family, because it is this generation and the previous generation. In the 90s we got out of developing affordable housing from a federal perspective, and we're paying for that now. The next generation is going to be fixing a lot of the problems that we've left.
So is there something in there in terms of the positive side of things, Diane, that is more or less, you talked about what's going on in Ottawa, that's sort of in the offing. Is there something else that you can see on the horizon, or is relatively low-hanging fruit that we should all be getting behind? Because the urgency, I think, in this conversation is what's lost, right? Because if we don't do something now, every day we wait, it feels like months that we lose.
And true, and the city is losing out as we watch the population leave. People will vote with their own feet if they can't make a living here. And so we've seen the Board of Trade talking about the importance of housing for workers. We've seen the mayor in the last election renewing his commitment to housing. We know that the 10-year strategy on housing from the feds is also rolling out, and it's back-ended with more money in the final years, and we're coming up on those years, so we should be seeing some more substantial investments. What we're doing at the food bank is catching people before any of those longer term interventions make a difference, but we can turn the ship. It's just going a bit slowly, and we're hoping that by the general conversations we're having, by shining the light on this, that we can put a bit more speed into the needed changes.
Yeah, and I guess a lot of the folks who are listening and who've been listening over the last little while really kind of come down to what's the call to action. It used to be, give us the money because we were more efficient at spending the money for the sake of donation. What's the call to action right now?
You're right. Every time I was asked, what should we do? I would say, we'd love it if you could donate food or funds or your time. That is secondary to my ask now. The ask now that we are making, every single listener, every single person watching or on our website know, is that they have a role to play in advocacy. We are asking that they call their elected official and say, today is the day you got to implement the poverty reduction strategy.
Yeah, and we want to put the tractors here out of business.
That's right.
Put them to better use, right? Just to be able to go and do other things. And we say that jokingly almost every time we talk, that the whole goal here is to put Daily Bread basically out of business.
Absolutely.
Just to flatten that so that there is no need. But, I go back to where we started the conversation in Second Harvest, and Lori will throw the number out. 61,000 charities and nonprofits, including Daily Bread and North York Harvest, are what people rely on to get their food across the country. That's just a staggering number in terms of the support that community's already doing.
And we just want to move it from community support to a right, to the fact that the duty bearer, the government, takes action in affordable housing, income supports, and decreasing precarious employment, so that charity doesn't have to do this. And let's move charity to talking about building arts programs and education and those types of things. I would love to move it away from the very necessary work that Daily Bread and this incredible team do.
Yeah, well, I guess, though, the argument becomes, though, Diane, is that it's become a key, it's in the fabric of the economy, those groups. So it's going to be a challenge to remove them from that economic expectation.
I think that was always the debate as food banks started. Were we then softening and cushioning the blow so it ended up that we should have just let people go hungry? And I'm sorry, but my head might understand the rationality of that, but my heart just can't let that happen.
Can't be the answer.
We know that a third of the people that are using food banks, for instance, are kids. So it can't be the answer. We have to do a both and. Mm-hmm. And I think that we're smart enough as a society that we can do both and. I want us not to be out of business. I want us to be obsolete.
Right, yeah. Well, listen, I always say I like to do the least I can do, and the least I can do is sit here and talk to you guys about the great work that you're doing. Neil, Diane, thank you, and let's hope that we can wrap this thing up sooner than later.
Thank you for the podcast. Thank you for season 2. I thought it was fantastic, and I look forward to season 3 and hearing all of the additional ideas that will come out to solve the problem that we're currently facing.
I can't imagine. Maybe the next one will just be on solution. Let's start banging some drums and dancing on desks.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
All right.
Thank you, Dave.
Thanks for listening to the 2030 Project. We would encourage you to subscribe to the show. We're on Apple and Spotify, Google, Audible, pretty much anywhere you get your podcasts. We'd also be grateful if you'd offer a rating on the show. We'd love your thoughts, your feedback, even your criticism. The 2030 Project podcast series is sponsored by Daily Bread Food Bank, a Toronto-based charity whose mission is to collaborate with all to eliminate food insecurity and advocate for solutions to end poverty. I'm Dave Trafford, and the 2030 Project is a Story Studio Network podcast produced by Eye Contact Productions.